Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Park Lane shawl. This shawl is being presented as a crochet-along on mooglyblog.com across the month of October 2020. So there will be 3 parts to these videos. To make this pattern, you will need 2 skeins of Red Heart Hygge Charm in one color and 1 skein of Red Heart Hygge Charm in a contrasting color. In the finished shawl that you can see here, I used 2 balls of the white and 1 ball of the gray. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to be using pink instead of white because it's a little easier to see on screen. You'll also need a USI 5.5mm hook or whatever gets you gauge. You can go to the link in the description for more information and links to other parts of this crochet-along. This video is for part 1 of the Park Lane Shawl crochet-along. The Park Lane shawl begins at the narrow end and it makes an asymmetrical shawl, which means as we work, we're increasing along one side and just working even along the other. Most of the sections are simple double crochet, but then we come to these sections of big texture. And in part 1, we're going to be working all the way through row 69, which takes us right up to this row here. To begin our Park Lane shawl, we're going to start with row 1. And row 1 is made on the wrong side of the shawl, but that will become a lot more obvious as we continue the pattern. So we're going to begin with our first color, whichever color you choose to be your first one, and I've already put my slip knot on the hook. Then we're simply going to chain 2, and this chain 2 is not going to count as our first stitch. And then I'm going to make 2 double crochets in the first chain made. You can see here I've kind of held that chain open with my thumb there, so I'm just going to go right into the back loop, just because that's my preferred portion of the chain, and make those 2 double crochets. So we'll work off our first one here. There's 1 double crochet, and then we go right into the same chain for our second double crochet. There we are. And that is it for row 1. We've got officially 2 stitches. After that, we turn and we come back for row 2. Row 2 begins with a chainless starting double crochet, which is my favorite first double crochet in a row substitute, but you can use whichever you prefer. If you prefer to actually chain 3 or do some other version of a first double crochet, there's several out there, you can do what you like, but here's how I like to do it. I'm going to pull my hook up so that the loop is about the height of a double crochet. Then I will put my finger on top of that loop, wrap that loop around my hook like a yarn over, go right into that first stitch, yarn over, pull a loop up and through. You'll notice I still have that top loop secured with my finger. Yarn over again, pull through that first loop and behind the loop that's wound around my hook, then yarn over again, and finally I'll release those loops and pull on through. There we go. And you can see that looks quite a bit like a standard double crochet. Whenever I use these stitches, I very much recommend putting a stitch marker in the top. It helps you find those top 2 loops to work back into it, and it always just helps you keep track of your stitches a little better. So once you've got your chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, then we're going to work 2 double crochets in the last stitch. Remember that chain 2 that we started with did not count as a stitch, so we just ignore that hanging out there on the side of row 1. So now we have 3 stitches made in row 2. Row 3, we turn to work back the other direction, and we're going to start again with a chainless starting double crochet. So we yarn over with that loop, go in there, right in that first stitch, yarn over and pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2 essentially, yarn over and pull through 2. And then I'll go ahead and put a stitch marker in this stitch. And if you'd like, you can use different colored stitch markers to help you remember as you go which side is the increasing side and which side is the decreasing side. But that will become more obvious here in just a moment as we continue as well. So let me get that back on my hook there. There we are. So to continue with row 3, we've got a chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, but then we're also going to double crochet in the same stitch right there. Get that on there. There we go. And then we double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. So the middle one gets 1 stitch and the last one gets 1 stitch. And then when we work in that marked stitch, we can move our stitch marker on up to the top of the next stitch, the first stitch of the next row. So there, at the end of row 3, we now have 4 stitches. Row 4 begins the repeats that we are going to be carrying through a large portion of this pattern. And they're basically going to be worked the same way every time. The only thing that will change, of course, is the final stitch count. So here is how to work row 4 for the Park Lane shawl. We are going to pull up that loop to make another chainless starting double crochet in our first stitch. So work that off however you like. Again, you could use a chain 3 instead, or some people like to chain 2 and then just make a double crochet and not count that chain 2. And then there's some other methods, whatever works for you. So we'll get our stitch marker in there. There we are. And then we are going to continue to double crochet in each remaining stitch across until we come to that last stitch. So right now that's not very many stitches because we're just at the beginning of our shawl and it's growing by just 1 stitch in every row. And that will almost always hold true, although there will be a few exceptions as we go. So however many stitches, when you're making your row 4 or your row 4 repeat, basically you chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, then double crochet into each stitch across until just 1 stitch remains. And then in that very last stitch is where we're going to be putting our 2 double crochets. So we know that side is going to be our increasing side, the side that for me right now on this little swatch has the orange stitch marker. So now that I've worked into that stitch, I'm going to pull that up and set it aside for a moment. And now we're going to begin row 5. Pull up a little bit more yarn here. I'm just using what was left over from the original here for our gray. There we are. So row 5 is, again, this is another row that's going to get repeated quite a bit. Rows 4 and 5 make up the majority of the shawl. So for all your row 5 and row 5 repeats, we're going to start again with our chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, or whatever double crochet substitute you like to use. Let me work that on off there. There we are. And get my stitch marker on there. There we go. I always like to take, whenever I have to take my hook out, I like to loop that loop of yarn, that working stitch over my finger in the same direction that I'm going to put my hook back in there. It just saves a lot of time and, hassle finding out that I had that loop twisted. So to continue with row 5, you've got your chainless starting double crochet. Then we double crochet in the same stitch. Again, remember this is going to be our increasing side now. We've got our orange stitch marker here. And then we simply double crochet in each remaining stitch across. So again, rows 4 and 5 always will increase our pattern by 1 stitch. One simply has the increase at the end and the other has the increase at the beginning. So we'll keep making these repeats, rows 4 and 5, for rows 6 through 19 of this pattern. When we get to the end of row 19, then we should have a total of 20 stitches. And then it's time to make row 20. Row 20 is another one of the rows that's going to get repeated quite a bit in this pattern. We are going to work front loop only stitches all the way across. And mostly it's going to be double crochets, but we want to start with that chainless starting double crochet. And we want to try and work that one in the front loop only too. Now, if you're not familiar with front loop and back loop only, front loop is always the loop that's closest to you in that top V at the top of a stitch. And the back loop is the one that's always furthest away. It's always relative to you, the crocheter. So it doesn't matter which way the yarn project or whatever you're working on is facing, the loop closest to you is the front loop and the loop furthest away is the back loop. So to make our chainless starting double crochet in the front loop only, we're going to, again, just as before, pull up our loop and wind it around our hook. But now, rather than going under both of those loops, we need to very carefully go under just that front loop. And you can use your other hand to sort of separate those loops if need be, so that you go just under that front loop and you leave that back loop unworked. Unworked meaning we just haven't worked a stitch into it yet. And I do say yet because we will be using that loop later. But for now, we just carefully go ahead and work that chainless starting double crochet off there. There we go. Get our stitch marker in the top of that. And we're all set there. So to continue on across, then we are going to front loop only double crochet in each remaining stitch across until we get to that last stitch. And then we'll put 2 front loop only double crochets in that last one. So to continue on across, we just yarn over, go into the next stitch, but again, let me pull that apart there so you can see I'm coming up in between those two loops, right in the center of that stitch. So I only catch that one loop as I make my double crochets. But so for row 20, you just continue front loop only, double crocheting across until you get to that last stitch, and then you put 2 double crochets in the front loop only of the very last stitch. So when it's the first row 20 repeat, you'll have 21 stitches. After that, you'll just always be increasing another stitch from the previous stitch. So here I am in that last marked stitch there, nice and easy to see because of my stitch marker. I can just go right under the front loop only in that last stitch as well, but I need to do it twice so that we get our increase. And there's that. Now we're ready for row 21. Row 21 will always follow row 20, of course, but a row 21 repeat will always follow a row 20 repeat. So to begin, of course, we need to turn our work, and then this is one of those rows that's not going to increase our stitch count. Your row 21 and row 21 repeats will have the same number of stitches as row 20. What we're going to do is we're going to be single crocheting in the unused loops. They were the back loops when we were coming from the other side. Now that we've turned, they'd be those front loops, but the unused loops of the row below the previous row and into the tops, meaning both loops of the previous stitch. So let's go ahead and do that together. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we do have 2 more stitches in this row, or excuse me, 1 more stitch in this row than we had in this row. So that means we need to work into this first unused loop twice. So we simply, without chaining, we're going to come down here and put our hook right under that first unused loop right below there. And this is going to fold that previous row over so that it sticks out. That's what we want, so that's totally fine. After we've gone under that unused loop there, then we come right back under those top 2 loops of the last stitch of the previous row, that first stitch right there. Go under both of those loops, yarn over, pull through, and then simply finish your single crochet. So that's going to be the first stitch of row 21. So we'll go ahead and get our stitch marker right in there. Even though it's just a single crochet and not a fancy stitch, I just love having my stitch markers to always help keep me on track. After that, now remember, because we've got more stitches in this row than we did in this row, we need to use this loop twice. So we go under that same unused loop, but now we want to move to the next stitch of the previous row. Go under both of those loops, pull through, and make a single crochet. Now we have the same number of unused loops left here as we do stitches up here, so we can work even. Go to the next unused loop and the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, and finish your single crochet. So now we just work evenly all the way across. So at the end of row 21, you should have the same number of stitches as you had in row 20, but it's going to create a really great line of texture that really pops out on the front of our shawl. Remember, I mentioned that row 1 was going to be from the wrong side, so our odd numbered rows, like row 21 right now, are worked from the wrong side of our shawl. So that means all the texture is going to be popping out onto the right side, which is why I said it will be very easy as you go to know which one is the right side and which one is the wrong side, because you'll be able to see that's where all the texture is. If you suddenly find bobbles coming out on a different side of the shawl, that means you've probably missed or added a row somewhere. So there we are. We've gone through our last unused loop and our last stitch, and I finished that single crochet right there. And I can go ahead and move that stitch marker now out of the way. So if I turn this over, you can see, hopefully here, it's a little more obvious after a few more rows are worked, but you can see that creates a really great squishy ridge of crocheted fabric right there that really pops out for some great texture. Now, color changes are going to vary throughout this pattern, so you'll need to follow the written pattern closely to see exactly where the color changes for each section come in. In the original row 22 is where we switched to color B. So we actually end up switching colors at the end of row 21. So what I need to do is just pull that last yarn over and pull through out of my stitch. And then if I can keep those loops on there, I can just stick my hook right back through that loop and the loop that we pulled through to start our single crochet. But then to finish it, I will do that last yarn over and pull through with our contrasting color, like so. Then I will be all set to crochet with our color B for row 22. Now, as we continue this pattern, if you follow along with the written pattern, rows 22 and 23 are exactly the same as rows 20 and 21. So we're making another one of those great ridges right there. Then we switch back to our color A. So you don't want to break that yarn. You want to just kind of float it along the side here. Let me find it. It's hiding from me there. There we go. So you just float that along the side as you work your rows so that you can bring it up and you have it when you need it. So after row 23 in our color B yarn, then we finish that last stitch with color A and do rows 24 and 25 with color A, another repeat of rows 20 and 21. So that same set of rows again. Then finally, for row 26, we make another repeat of row 4, which you've already seen. That takes us up to a total of 24 stitches. So the next row that is unique in this pattern is row 27, which is our bobble row, actually, where we start adding our bobbles. So I'm going to reset this yarn a little bit, and then we'll start on row 27 together. Row 27 is another odd-numbered row, so that means, of course, we're working it from the wrong side of our shawl. And here's where we're going to make our bobbles. We start with a chain 1 and a single crochet in the very first stitch, like so. So I will go ahead and put my stitch marker right back in that first stitch of the row. And then I'm going to make a bobble in the same stitch. And bobbles come in all sorts of sizes. So for this pattern, it's a double crochet 4 together, all worked in the same stitch. So let's go ahead and do that together. We're going to yarn over and go right back in that first stitch, because right now that's the indicated stitch. Yarn over, pull up our loop, yarn over, and pull through 2 here. Get those worked off. There we are. Now we stop with 2 loops left on the hook and yarn over and do it again, right back into that same stitch. So that is our second start of a double crochet hanging out there with that last loop still on there. Then we yarn over again, do it another time, a third time. There we are. So after 3 of those, we now have 4 loops left on the hook. And then we do it one more time, our 4th time, all back into that same stitch. Stop before you finish that one. And now we've got 5 loops left on the hook. So we yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops. And as I pull through, I like to use my thumb to really sort of push out on those stitches so that my bobble can start forming really nice and tightly. When we come back to work into this stitch, this loop right here is the loop that we'll be working into. So we can really pull this loop right on through our stitch here, like so. So you can see now it's all nice and tight there up at the top. So right after we make that bobble, then we want a single crochet in the next stitch. So we find that next stitch, and I'm going to fold my work towards me so that that bobble starts popping out on the right side, which is the side away from us right now, of our fabric. So we fold that towards us as we go into that next stitch for a single crochet and make a nice solid single crochet on there. Don't let these loops pull up and get leggy. You really want this to be just a nice, tight, small, not so tight you can't work into it, but a nice, small single crochet, because that fold and that pulling down there is what makes the bobble push out on the right side of your fabric, which is the opposite side we're working from. So then to continue on across, we have our repeat. We bobble in the next stitch, single crochet in the next, and we just continue that all the way across. This is how you work all the row 27 repeats. At the end of some of those, you'll change color by finishing the last stitch with the different color or the next color, whatever the next color is. And for some of them, you won't. So again, you'll want to check with your instructions for that. But I'm going to make one more bobble here in the next stitch with you. So let's go ahead and yarn over and go in the next stitch. Start a double crochet, stop with 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and start a second double crochet. Stop with 3 loops left on the hook, yarn over, start a third double crochet. Stop with 4 loops left on the hook, and finally start a fourth double crochet. Stop with 5 loops left on the hook, yarn over, pull through all 5. And I find too, if you start getting caught like that, try and point your hook down into the stitch towards the bottom of the stitch. That helps a little bit like that. Then of course, fold it over as you make that next single crochet. So just repeat those 2 stitches all the way across for row 27. Okay, so I have finished row 27, and I just want to go ahead and show you now we've got all these great bobbles popping out on the front of our fabric, the same side as that ridge. So we've now made, part one rather, all the different kinds of rows that we're going to make. You can see here on the written instructions after row 27, it's simply repeats of other rows we've already made. Rows 4, row 27, and then rows 20 through 25 again, all repeats of rows and stitches we've already made. So part one takes you all the way through row 69. Okay, so that's all the instructions for part one. Remember, we started at this small row here, and then we gradually grew with those 4 and 5 row repeats. Then we've got those great ridges. We just changed colors a couple times for that. Then we've got a few rows of bobbles. Then it's back to 4 and 5, some more of those ridges and some more bobbles, and then some more 4 and 5 row repeats here. So that will, like I say, get you all the way through row 69, and we'll pick up with row 70 in part 2. And that's how to crochet part 1 of the Park Lane Shawl. Please go to the link in the description for the written instructions, as well as links to part 2 and part 3. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe.